CSS is short for Cascading Style Sheets and is a design element of the websites or web applications we see on the internet today. CSS allows us to kind of fancy up the web pages by adding different styles to the web pages, like color to the background, make tables and boxes and rounding the corners of those tables and boxes, or make columns, or even just making the text look a certain way, like with color or different font styles and font sizes. Now, like with HTML and HTML5, CSS also has different versions, or with CSS they're also called levels. The current and most widely used level is CSS2, but CSS3 has been in the works for quite a while, technically since late 1999 into early 2000. In 2000 was just in a working draft state and not much else. But it is to the point now where some of the modules in CSS3 are being adopted by the big browsers. Problem is that not all browsers recognize all the goodies that CSS3 provides. The big difference between CSS 2.1 and the new CSS levels like CSS3 and even CSS4 is that the newer CSS levels are broken into different modules instead of just one huge batch of code that all browsers would need to interpret. With the new CSS levels broken into modules, the browsers can kind of just work on interpreting a single module at a time and makes for a quicker implementation of all those goodies within that particular module. Problem is that the browsers are not moving very quick to implement all the modules in level 3, but they are getting there. Level 4, or CSS4, will not even get touched on until all the modules in CSS3 are standardized with the major browsers. Now, a couple of examples of the many benefits of CSS3 over CSS2, besides just the module thing, is the replacement of some of the outdated elements, like how you can add rounded corners to boxes, and some of the new styling options like adding a drop shadow effect that both these examples used to require the use of an image or images to get that effect. CSS is the way to go when wanting to add some of the cool effects and design elements to your site without loading it up with a ton of bloat code. Now, by bloat code, I mean using many lines of HTML code to accomplish the same presentation effects that 3 or 4 lines of CSS code will do, and do better. Plus, most all of the bloat code has been deprecated in HTML4 and in HTML5. Many browsers will not even support them. This is going to bring us to the end of the video on Introduction to CSS. When crafting the design or presentation part of your HTML pages, it's a good idea to have at least a basic idea of how things are put together. This foundation that I'm talking about is the CSS syntax. That's S-Y-N-T-A-X, not S-I-N-T-A-X. This video will lay the groundwork for you to more easily put together your own cascading style sheets, or at least help you better understand other people's CSS files. A CSS syntax is the specific order or structure of the rules regarding a particular style or design you're wanting to add to certain parts of your web page. Now, each one of these rules consists of one or more selectors and a declaration block. Now, hang with me, you'll begin to see how this all fits together here in just a second. Now, a selector is the item that is being styled, kind of like the paragraph tag or the H1 tag. The declaration block is the actual style or design that is being put on that selector. The declaration block consists of a property and a value. And I've got a few demonstrations set up for you here. This is what's called an inline CSS. And here is the selector, that's the H2, and the P for the paragraph tag is the selector in this line. And here we have the declaration right here. Now, this is a little bit different than that of an internal and an external CSS file in relation to the declaration. The declaration here is all of this stuff right here. This has the attribute, the property, and the value. And with an inline style, there's no curly brackets. For example, and in this demonstration, we have both the inline CSS and we've got the internal CSS. And this better demonstrates the declaration block. By the way, the internal CSS is put in the head section in between the opening and closing style tags. And here's the selectors right here, and here's the declaration. And inside the declaration, we've got the curly brackets. That's the opening and closing curly brackets. Right there's the opening, right there's the closing. And inside of here, we have the property and the value. Property and the value. Property and the value. And here's a another representation of a declaration block, and this more resembles a block, if you will. And for the H3 selector, we've got multiple properties and multiple values for those properties. And what I'm trying to show here is that you can have multiple properties for a particular selector. Now you can also have a combination of multiple selectors and multiple properties. And that's what I'm showing here. Again, in an internal style sheet, we have the selector and we've got the declaration. Inside the declaration, we've got the property and the value. And here is a demonstration of a grouping, and that is we've got several selectors with multiple declarations. Again, property, value, property, value. Now you can have the same type of grouping in an inline, but in the declaration here they have to be separated by the semicolon. That's called the declaration separator. I call it a semicolon, but you know, tomato, tomato. So if I wanted in my paragraph here, if I wanted this content in the paragraph to be not just with a green background color, but also I wanted the text to be a certain font family or font size, then I can also list that in here. Again, so long as I've got a declaration separator or a semicolon in between the two. So to recap, the CSS syntax is the structure of the rules regarding your CSS layout. You have the selectors and you have the declarations. The declarations contain two things, the properties and the values of those properties. And don't forget, you can also group those things together. This brings to an end this video on the CSS syntax. Thanks for watching, and you have a great day. There are 3 different ways that you can add cascading style sheets or CSS to your web page or web pages: inline, internal, and external. This video will demonstrate how to add inline CSS to your web page. Now the inline method is kind of like it sounds. It's used in the line where the HTML tag and the content is located. Now this should only be used when a particular style is required 1 or 2 times on the page. The problem with the inline method is that if you decide later on to change all of your H2 text to red instead of, say, the original blue style that you had, you have to make the change on each H2 entry individually. The inline style, attribute, and property is placed inside the relevant HTML tag. Demo time. Now I've got my text editor opened up here. That's Komodo. So I'm going to go ahead and open up an HTML5 template. Go up to File, New, File from Template. Make sure that HTML5 is selected. Click on Open. And let's go ahead and put in my page title. And in the body, I'm going to go ahead and add an H2 style along with some text for that H2 tag. I got the open bracket, H2 space, and the attribute is style, equals, give me a couple of double quotes, backspace into those double quotes, and I want to make the background color, which is the property, and then colon, and then I want to set the value for that property at, nice bright yellow. And let's close that out. You see, with Komodo, it goes ahead and adds the closing H2 tag already. So now that I want to put in my content, and let's add our paragraph. Again, another example of the inline CSS style. Opening bracket, P, space, add the attribute style. And with it automatically popping up there, I just hit the return key and it fills in the blanks for me. And I want to put in double quotes, but I'm going to only put in 1 this time. You see how it automatically fills in the second one for me? I want to add the property. And by the way, you can add multiple properties and multiple values to the same style. You just have to separate them by the semicolon. So now that I need the property value separator, which is the colon. And you can see here that you've got the little tip box that pops up there. This one sets the background color of an element, either a color value or the keyword transparent, to make the underlying colors shine through, which is pretty cool. And a nice bright green color. And here is the semicolon that I forgot to put in the first one after the word yellow. Now then, let's go ahead and close this out, and Komodo will go ahead and add the closing paragraph tag for me, just like that. And my content, And let's save this. Now, of course, if this were a home page I was making, then I would want to name it index.html, because that way the browsers will automatically pick this up. We'll click on Save, and let's go ahead and preview this in, let's say, Chrome. Click on Preview, and it popped it in over here, so let me resize this, and here it is. Let me go ahead and shrink this down a little bit so we can see the coding that we've got here. So we've got the H2, that's this guy right here. Oops, I messed up. I meant to put the number 2 there. Instead of holding my shift key down, I put the @ symbol sign there. But anyway, it did work out pretty good. And then this here is the example of the paragraph background color. And again, you can add multiple properties and values to the same style. If I wanted to style up the text within that paragraph, then I can add an additional property and value like font color and then the color red, and then that would not only give us a background color of green but also the text color of red. Pretty cool stuff. And that's going to bring us to the end of this video on Inline CSS. There are 3 different ways that you can add cascading style sheets or CSS to your web page or web pages: inline, internal, and external. This video will demonstrate how to add internal CSS to your web page. Now, an internal style sheet is best used when a single web page has a unique style. An inline CSS should only be used when only a few HTML elements on a page require styling. And an external style sheet is best used when several different web pages require styling. Now, you define internal styles in the head section of your HTML page by using the style tag. Here, let me open up my editor and I'll show you what I'm talking about. And in this demonstration, I'm going to be using Komodo as my editor. It's just a nice little text editor. You can do the same thing with Composer or Notepad or any text editor for that matter. Come on up here to File, New. I'm going to use a template for HTML5. And here we are, basic HTML5 page. Now I've got some code over here. I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste over this, save some typing time. And this is basically it. We've got our opening and closing HTML tag, opening and closing body tag, and in the head section, that's the opening and closing head tag. We also have the opening and closing title tag. But what I want to show you here is the style tag. That's the opening and closing style tag. These are only used whenever we're working with internal style sheets. So in between the opening and closing style tags, this is where we have our CSS styling, referencing whatever content we would have in the body section for those particular selectors. In this case, for the body, we're going to be using a gray background. For all H1 tags, it's going to be a color blue, and the font size is going to be 2.5 EM, or roughly 40 pixels. Font family, and the H2 is going to be green, and so on and so on. And you can have multiple declarations per selector. And by the way, a declaration consists of the property and the value of that property. So for example, in the H1, we've got multiple declarations. We've got the property and value, property and value, property and value. And you can also have multiple selectors for a particular declaration as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at this in our preview. Go ahead and save this. That'll work for now. Come on up here and preview and click on preview. And here we are. Gray background, which I will probably never do, but just for demonstration purposes, it works. And to demonstrate how you can make a quick change here, you just go from gray to white, click on save, and there you go. That's simple. And that's going to do it for this video on internal CSS. Thanks for watching, and you have a great day. There are 3 different ways that you can add cascading style sheets or CSS to your web page or web pages: inline, internal, and external. This video will demonstrate how to add external CSS to your web page. An external style sheet is best used when several web pages require styling. An internal style sheet is best used when a single web page has a unique style, and an inline CSS should only be used when only a few HTML elements on a page require styling. The external CSS is my preferred method because I can create one style sheet and apply it on every one of my websites in a matter of seconds, or however long it takes for me to type out a URL. And since I'm a copy and paste person, it takes very little time. Since the external style sheet handles all the presentation or design of the entire website, you can make a single change to any one of your styles on that one CSS file, and that change takes place on your entire site. For example, if you have the H1 tag set as blue, but now you want them all to be red, instead of having to go to each and every one of your pages on that site and look for each and every one of those H1 reference tags to change them all to red, you simply change the one H1 blue tag on your external style sheet to red, and bam, every one of your H1 elements are now red. Click, click, done. That simple. Here, let me show you an example of an external style sheet and just how you can add it to your website. Very simple. First off, you want to make sure that your style sheet is not a web page. In other words, it does not have the declaration, it does not have your opening and closing HTML tags, no opening and closing head tags, and all that. All that stuff should not be on your style sheet. And the style sheet needs to be saved as a .css file. So you have in this example, a notepad, just a plain old text document, and you have all of your stylings on here. And even if on a particular web page you're not going to be using an H5 tag, for example, I would go ahead and have all the stylings that I would possibly use on any website on the one style sheet. That way I'm covered. I can use this same style sheet on every single one of my websites. And if on one of my websites, let's say website A, I'm only using an H1 and an H3 tag, I'm covered. If on website B, I'm using an H1 and an H5 and an H6 tag, I'm covered there as well with the same exact style sheet. And I've only got 3 of them listed here, but you can have as many as you want. Now, whenever you save this, especially if you're using a notepad document like this is, you want to make sure that you save it as a .css file. And using this example here, with Notepad, you want to make sure that your Save As type is selected to all files. And you want to make sure that the extension again is .css. And you can name it whatever you want, but it should be, ideally, it should be in the same location as your website files are. Not necessary, and I'll show you that here in just a second, but ideally it should be located in the same directory as all of your website files. Let me go ahead and open up my HTML file in my editor. Right click, open with, Komodo. Here we are. Now, this is my website file here, and I've got all of my tags here with the content in between the tags, for example, H1 tag, H2 tag, paragraph tags, and so on. And for an external style sheet, you have to have the link here that brings in that style sheet from wherever it is into this particular web page. And it's located between your opening and closing head tag. And this is the exact way it needs to be laid out. Now, right in here is where you can have the absolute URL, the HTTP : / name of your domain and all that stuff. If your CSS file is not located in the exact same directory as your HTML files are. But in this example, it is. So this is all we need right here. So let me go ahead and demonstrate this by showing you this in a browser, or as in this case, keeping it on the same page here. I'm going to show it to you in the Komodo tab. And this pops up in my other monitor, of course. Click on Preview, and here we are. And just to demonstrate the quickness of changing these, let's assume for a second that this CSS file is pointed on 20 pages in this particular website. And on every one of those pages, I want the H1 tag to be a different font style, or from a different font family. So again, instead of going to each one of those pages and each one of those H1 tags to make the change, from Verdana to, say, Arial, I make the one change on the one CSS sheet, save that CSS sheet, and we're done. And of course, to demonstrate it, I just need to refresh the page. Boom. Every single one of those H1 tags all over my entire website is now done. And that's going to bring to an end this video on setting up and using an external style sheet. Thanks for watching, and you have a great day. This video will show you how to add some extra styling to your clickable links. Now, by default, links will appear in a certain way in all browsers. An unvisited link is underlined and blue. A visited link is underlined and purple. And an active link is underlined and red. Now, usually the active link you only see for a split second as you're clicking on the link. Now, using cascading style sheets, also known as CSS, you can change the default look quite a bit. I mean, you can change the color of the text, the color of the background, even the size, type, and family of the fonts used in those links. Now, there are 4 different states of a link. Unvisited, that's normal unvisited link. That's the underline in blue I was talking about. Visited, that's a link that the user has visited, and that's what I was talking about as far as it being underlined in purple. Hover, that's the state of the link when the user mouses over it. And by default, with no CSS, usually there's nothing that happens. Just your pointed cursor might turn to a hand. And an active link is a link the very moment it is clicked. And again, you got to look fast because it's going to turn red, but only for a split second before it takes the person from that link to the destination. Now, let me go ahead and open up my Komodo Editor and show you what this looks like. I've got a little bit of content already set up here for my HTML5 page. We've got a little styling in the head section and a clickable link, which is demonstrated down below. Now, the styling, as far as having this set up in your style tags, you have to remember that there's a certain order to this. In other words, you can't just throw in hover up first and then visited and then active and then link. You have to have it pretty much in this order because the hover, this is the rule anyway, the hover has to come after the visited and the link, and the active has to come after the hover. Even if you're not going to be styling all of these, I would go ahead and get in the habit, if you're going to style any of them, I would go ahead and get in the habit of adding all 4 of them in this order each and every time. That way you're not breaking any rules. Okay, now, as I was saying, by default, a clickable link is underlined and blue. And as you can see, as I hover over it, there's no styling attached, but the default action is the pointed cursor turns to a hand, or whatever your cursor is on your computer. In my case, the default, and that's the pointy thing, the arrow, pointy thing, and that's the arrow, turns to a hand. Now, whenever we add some styling to this, you need to add the little curly brackets, and using Komodo, it does a lot of that for me. I just use the opening curly bracket, and it automatically puts the closing curly bracket in there. So I'm going to hit the return or enter key, give me some space here, and I'm going to change the default blue to, let's say, pink. So I'm going to use the property color, and then after the word color, you have to put the colon. And then defining the color, we can use either RGB, the actual name pink, or the hex code for pink. I'm just going to go ahead and keep it simple. Now let's go ahead and save this. And there you go. Not the prettiest color, but still just demonstrating that you can change the color. That's how you do it. Now let's go to something a little bit brighter here. And save. And there we are. Now like I said, we can add additional styling to this particular link, and if we do add additional styling, we have to add the semicolon at the end of the first styling or the end of the first value. Now then, let's go ahead and get rid of that underlining there, and we do that by using the property text-decoration and the value none. And add the semicolon, save, and you see right here the underline is gone. And you can go on and on and on. Now I want to add some styling to the visited and to the hover. So we go ahead and click on this to activate it so that it will represent a visited link. Now let's hit our back arrow button. Now then it's purple, which is the default styling or the default color for a visited link. Let's go ahead and change that to red, or let's make it yellow. Opening curly brackets, hit the enter key or the return key, and the property is color, and the value is going to be yellow. And then the semicolon, and let's save, and there you are. I mean, you can't see it, but it's there. Could have made a better choice. And now then, let's add something to hover. Let's add a background color, let's say blue. So opening curly brackets, hit the return key to give us some room, and the property is going to be background dash color, and the value is going to be blue. Again, you can use the RGB color value, you can use the hex code, or as in this case, you can use the color name. Throw in the semicolon and save, and hover should turn blue. Now another idea would be, instead of adding a background color, you can add a background image so that whenever you hover over it, that image pops up instead. So that gives you a pretty good idea of some of the things you can do if you wanted to add some additional styling to your clickable links. That's going to bring us to the end of this video. Thanks for watching, and you have a great day. In this video, we're going to look at the CSS Comment Tag, how to make one, and how it's used. Basically, the CSS Comment Tag makes the content between the opening and closing comment tag invisible to the browsers. The main purpose for the CSS comment tags are to, for example, explain your code, and it might help you later when you are wondering what the heck you were thinking when you added that particular code. A few other things to know about the CSS comment tags are that they can span multiple lines. The comments can include CSS elements that you do not want in the document, and maybe you'll put them in later. But for now, you just don't want to delete them. And comments can also include information like your name, email address, and web address. So first off, let's go ahead and take a look at how to make a comment tag. Pretty simple, really. Like most tags, it has an opening and a closing. Now with the CSS comment tag, this is your opening. That's the / and the asterisk. And then you put your content in the middle, and then the closing is just the opposite. The asterisk first, then the /. Those are the two characters for your CSS comments tag. So again, you've got this / asterisk, asterisk, / and then the content goes in the middle. Everything in the middle is totally invisible to the browsers. Let me show you an example. Here in a basic HTML5 document, I've got in the head section some code that I want to take place on the content within the body section. And here is the opening comment tag. Remember, / asterisk, asterisk, / asterisk, 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 and everything in between these two guys is totally invisible to the browsers. And here is the description that I was referring to, and the fact that it can span multiple lines. Many of them, though, are just on a single line. And I've got my meta information in here, totally optional. And I've got some additional CSS in here as well, that for the time being, so long as it's in between these opening and closing CSS comment tags, it's not being seen by the browsers. So if you have multiple options for a particular batch of code in your CSS, this would work great. Just keep that up in here for either future reference for yourself or for somebody else you're wanting to maybe pass this information on to. And that's it. That's going to wrap up this video on CSS comment tags. HTML has a whole bunch of different elements or selectors that you can add styles to, like your H1 tag or the paragraph tag or even the body tag and so on. But one of the many cool things with CSS and CSS3 is that you can make up your own selector called an ID or a class selector. This video is on the ID selector and how it's made and used. Now, ID selectors are used when there is just a single unique element needing to be styled, like, say, for example, nickname or first name or phone number, just a few of them that I just made up. Oh, and if you didn't notice, they will all begin with the hashtag or number sign or octothorpe. Yeah, I said octothorpe. That's my word of the day. Basically, they're all three the same thing. Here's an example of using an ID selector. Basic HTML5 document, and I've got some styling up here in the head section and the content down here. And I've got the hashtag nickname, I've got the hashtag first name, and I've got the hashtag phone number as my ID selectors. And for each of these, I've put a little bit of a style to it. For example, everything down here that I have written as the nickname ID selector will have a blue background. And I did this to demonstrate that you can have the same style for multiple selectors, and you can also have multiple styles for multiple or single selectors. I just put this down here just to keep things simple. So basically, everything with the ID of first name and ID of phone number is going to have a background of a pink color. Let's go ahead and take a look at this and see what it looks like. Let's kind of keep it all right here. And that's it. Now, just to kind of demonstrate further that we can add multiple styles, I'll just go ahead and change the color of these guys here, or everything that's associated with first name and phone number, to red. And save. And there we go. Now, if you're going to style a particular element several times within a document, like say you're going to use nickname to also style your H1 tags and maybe even your body tags, then you'll want to use a class selector and not an ID selector. But that's the makings of a different video. So in this video, you learned what an ID selector was, and you learned that octothorpe is the same thing as a number sign or hashtag. That's going to bring to a close this video on ID selectors in CSS and CSS3. Thanks for watching, and you have a great day. HTML has different elements or selectors that you can add styles to, like the paragraph tag or the body tag. But one of the many cool things with CSS and CSS3 is that you can make up your own selector, and these are called ID selectors or a class selector. This video is on the class selector and how it's made and used. Class selectors are used whenever you have several different elements that may use the same styling. Let's say you want to style a few of the different paragraphs, but not all the paragraphs in your document. Or you want to style several H1 tags, but not all the H1 tags in your document. And that's where the class selectors come in at. And you may have noticed that all of these examples of a class selector begins with a dot. And here's what the CSS code will look like. Kind of a basic HTML5 document here, and I've got the CSS code right up here in the head section in between the opening and closing style tags. Now, I've got a few different types in here, but all three of these are class selectors. As you can see, this one begins with a dot, this one begins with a dot, but actually it is specifically for the P tag or the paragraph tag. Likewise with this one. Now, the way this is set up here, hopefully to avoid some confusion anyway, is that everything in the content down here in the body section that use the class selector center will be centered and the text will be blue, just like we've got right here. Now you can also specify a particular HTML element like your paragraph tag or your H1 tag or even your body tag that should be affected by the class. And that's demonstrated right here, where we have the HTML element for the paragraph tag, that's the P, right in front of the class selector center. So if we're using the class selector center along with the paragraph tag as defined down here, then this content in this paragraph will not be centered and blue. Instead, it will take on this particular styling right here. It'll be centered and gold. Here, let me just go ahead and show you what this looks like here. That might help a little bit. Open this up right here. So this bottom one here, where we've got the paragraph tag and the class selector center. And as you can see here too, by the way, that the dot is not included down here, only up here in the styling. But down here, whenever we write out the class selector center for this particular paragraph tag, then since it's defined up here as being centered and gold, that's the way we're looking at it right here. Otherwise, if we did not have the class selector center defined for a particular element, in this case the paragraph tag, then it would take on the styling of right down here, just the center. The same way that the H1 tag is right here. Because as you can see, there's not a particular class selector center up here for the H1 tag. So as this is written down here for the H1 class selector center, it's taking on the styling of just this guy right here. Let me further demonstrate that by just deleting this guy right here altogether and save that. And that way this guy right down here that was taking on the characteristics of the P.Center class selector, it will now take on the stylings of just the center class selector, which is centered and blue, just like this guy right here. So let's go ahead and save this. And there you go. And I went ahead and added this P.Centeroo just to let you know that yes, you can in fact make up your own class selectors, even if it means making up your own word in the process. And as we look down here, the P.Class Centeroo, that's this middle one right here, where we've got it taking on the styling of being centered and red. The beauty of using a class selector like these, or any class selector for that matter, is that you can use it on several different HTML elements. Now, if this were an ID selector, you could only use it on one HTML element. But that's the making of a different video. That's going to bring to a close this video on class selectors in CSS and CSS3. Thanks for watching, and you have a great day. It's always a good idea to follow the rules, especially when it comes to writing design or presentation code for your HTML documents. This video will show you how to make sure your CSS and CSS3 code is properly written and how to fix it when it isn't. There's a free website that will quickly validate your CSS code and either pass it or fail it. And if it fails it, you'll be given tips on where the problem lies and what needs to be fixed. Now, validation basically looks for errors and non-standard coding. Now, most browsers today are pretty forgiving, but some might display your messed up or non-standard coded web page all kind of funky like. I should also mention that striving for 100% validation is a good thing, but not having 100% validation is not necessarily a terrible thing. So, can CSS that's not 100% valid cause things like search engine optimization issues? Well, not likely, but keep in mind, sometimes you might need to break a couple of rules for a particular element to work on your site. Just make sure that your site displays the way that you want it to in all the major browsers, and you should be okay. Now, if your CSS code is just riddled with problems and bad coding, then chances are your site won't display anyway, and that should be more of an issue to be concerned with than search engine optimization. Now, when you have some time, here's a good read you might want to check into regarding validation and things like SEO. It's at yoast.com/w3c-validation-SEO. And the site we want to go to for our validation is jigsaw.w3.org/CSS-validator, and here we have 3 different ways in which we can validate our CSS, either by having it already on a server and providing a URL here for your CSS document, or you can upload the file from your computer, or what I'm going to be demonstrating here is inputting that CSS code directly onto the page here. Now, of the 3, the most accurate is this one here, the first one. But let's go here, and just for demonstration purposes, let me go ahead and provide a CSS code just to demonstrate what the error will look like. And where I've made the intentional mistake at is right here on the color. I added a D there, when in fact it should be A for the alpha channel. But let's go ahead and click on check. And there it is. There's our error. And if it passed, you'd get a big old green bar right across there. And it tells you right here, if we hover over this, you can see it says line 12. Tells you on line 12, the error is the background color RGB is not a background color value. So if you're familiar with RGB or even the RGB with the alpha channel, then you'll know right away that, oh, there's my mistake. That D should be an A. So let's go ahead and enter the correct code. Change that to an A. And one thing I want to point out here is that right here, this is kind of incorrect as well. There should be a semicolon at the end of the word none, but there isn't. So let me show you what's going to happen with that. Click on check. We got our green bar, but we come on down here to the bottom where it provides us with the valid CSS information. You see here it's automatically added that semicolon for us. So what I suggest you do is just get in the habit, if you're going to use this validator, go ahead and enter your code up there, and even if it does pass, come on down here and grab all of this code that's down here, copy this, paste it on your CSS document, overwriting the existing, just to make sure that all of it is perfect as this is displayed down here. And that's just how simple and fast it is to check your CSS for proper validation and fix any errors that are found. Thanks for watching, and you have a great day. This video will demonstrate using CSS, or cascading style sheets, to change the text font size. Being able to display the text on your HTML documents the way you want them to look is an important part of keeping site visitors on the site and coming back to the site. Sometimes a bit of text should be larger or smaller than the surrounding text to convey something to the site visitor. You want a certain paragraph to stand out, so you want the font size to be larger than the rest on the page. Or you want to set the font so that it is automatically larger when viewed by a site visitor with visual impairment. Here, let's open up our editor and have a look at how to change the font size. But first, I want to point out that there are a few ways to set the size of your font. That's with points, pixels, or the recommended way, and that's with ems, or EM. Points and pixels are more of an absolute, where ems are more relative to the visitor's browser settings. For example, if the visitor has vision problems and has set their browser to display text larger than normal, then you're better off using the ems. With this in mind, I'd suggest just sticking to using the ems in all cases. Now, 1 EM is equal to the browser's current font size, and 16 pixels is the default text size on most browsers. But when a visitor has set their browser font size larger, then using 1 EM will equal the same size as all of the other text being displayed in that browser's changed font size setting. So for example, 0.5 EM will be smaller and 2 EM will be larger. Okay, let's go ahead and head on over to the editor here. And right now you can see that I've got the content between the opening H1 tag and closing H1 tag set to 40 pixels. And for the H2 tag, 30 pixels. And for the paragraph tag, that's these two paragraphs here, We've got both of those set at 19 pixels for the content between the opening and closing P tags. Let's go ahead and take a look at this in our browser, or in this case, in Komodo. And this is what it looks like. Now, if I did not have the P tag set, then it would be, by default, 16 pixels, which would be a little bit smaller than this, which is 19 pixels. Now let's take a look at the same thing using ims. And now for a little math, remember I had said that 16 pixels is the default size of the text in most browsers? Well, if you were to take the 40 pixels that was defining the H1 tag and divide that by 16, you'll get 2.5 EM. So the 2.5 EM will be the exact same size as the 40 pixels was. Likewise with the H2 tag and the 30 pixels, divide that by 16, you're going to get 1.875 EM, and for the 19 pixels for the paragraph tag, that's going to equal 1.1875 EM. So whenever I save this, you should not see any change in these sizes down here. And there you go. So if you wanted this to be really small for the paragraph, just make that 0.1875, and that's pretty darn small. So let's bring that guy back up to normal size, or what I like to call normal anyway. Now this will work in most every single browser right now, but just to be on the super safe side of things, if you were to add one more tag in our CSS, it will make it 100% positive that it will work in every single browser. And that is styling the body text at 100%. And if we save this, we'll see that there won't be any changes down here, because you've already seen that this works fine in this browser. But if you have some odd browser out there where it may not recognize EM, or it may not recognize point or pixels, well, this way it will. But like I said, in most cases, you'll be able to get by just fine without this, but I'd say it takes a split second to add it. So go ahead and add this into your styling and you'll be fine as wine. And this is the end of our video on changing the font size of your HTML documents text using CSS. There are many design elements that you can add to your HTML documents using CSS or cascading style sheets. This video will show you how to add color to the text on your HTML documents. Now basically there are 3 ways to define color in your CSS. Now I say basically because there are actually 6 different ways. Hexadecimal colors, RGB colors, which stands for red, green, blue, RGBA colors, which with CSS3 the A is the ability to add an alpha channel to your RGB color scheme. Then we have HSL, which stands for hue, saturation, and lightness. And we also have the HSLA, which basically is the same thing, hue, saturation, lightness, but also with the alpha channel added. Then we have the predefined cross-browser color names, and there's about 143 of those different colors. Well, that's like the red, the blues, even cornflower blue. But the 3 most common ways of those 6 are the hex code, RGB, and the color names. Here, let's take a look at an example in our editor. Now, I've added some content here in the body section, and up here in the head section I've already defined some styles, one for our body background color, one for the H1 tag, one for the H2 tag, and a class style for the paragraph, and I just named this fried. Now, one of the cool things about class selectors and ID selectors, and this is a class selector, is that you can name them whatever you want. And in most cases, it's a better idea to go ahead and name them something related to the actual styling. For example, this one is going to be a blue paragraph, so it would have probably been better, just for organizational purposes, to name this something like p.blue color or blue paragraph or something like that. But I named it fried just to let you know that, yeah, you can name it whatever you want. And I've got the 3 basic color schemes up here. The hexadecimal code, which in this example begins with a pound sign, number sign, hashtag, octothorpe, whatever you want to call it, and the name, the color name, and the RGB, or the red, green, blue. And anytime that you're defining colors, to remain W3C compliant, you should also go ahead and define the body background color as well. That's why I went ahead and put this up here. Even though this E5, E5, E5 hexadecimal code is pretty close to white, I made it just a little on the gray side of things just so that you can see that it is different than the white background of a default page. And just like all CSS syntax, we've got the opening curly bracket, we've got the property, in this case it's the color, then we've got the colon, Then we've got the value for that property. That in this case is the hexadecimal code for green. And then we've got the semicolon, and then we've got the closing curly bracket. So let's go ahead and take a look at this in our editor's browser. Go ahead and open this up here in Komodo. And here we go. You can see that the background color, this E5, it's a bit on the gray side. And then the H1 tag is green. Anywhere that the H1 tag is being used down here in the content area, the text between the opening and closing H1 tag is going to be green. And for the H2 tag, the text between the opening and closing H2 tag is going to be red. And wherever I've got the class defined for the paragraph as fried, that content between the opening and closing P tag or paragraph tag is going to be, we see down here, blue. Now you can add additional properties and values up here, but this video being on color and not anything else, I didn't want to confuse the issue. So if you wanted to have maybe the text italicized, or you want to have the text in a larger font, you would be able to add those items in here as well to affect everything that was in this particular class or in this particular selector. Now that's how you can add color to blocks. What if you wanted to add color to, say, just a couple of words and not the entire block of text? Then you could use what's called Inline Css and the span tag. Let me demonstrate that real quick. Let's say in this first paragraph, we wanted just these two words right here, lorem ipsum, to be yellow, or whatever color you wanted. And that would be, where are we at here? First paragraph, right here. So at the beginning, we want to put our opening span tag. Then we want to put a space. Then we want to put in the word style equals, then our opening double quote, the word color, colon. And in this example, I'm going to use the color name, and I'm going to go cornflower blue. Then let's close up those double quotes, close that opening span tag. And the way this editor is set up, it automatically adds the closing span tag right there. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that out of there and put that on the opposite side of the text I want to be affected by this span tag right here. And let's save this, and let's see what this looks like right here. You see here, that's the color cornflower blue. That's one of the 140 some odd color names that most browsers will recognize. And that's how you can add color to just a couple of words or more within a block of text. Now before closing out this video, I want to also mention that there is an HTML5 tag called mark, and how it adds a background color or highlight to a word or a group of words. You can also style this with your CSS. Let me demonstrate that real quick. Let's go ahead and come on down here in the second paragraph that's already got some style to it, and let's try the lorem ipsum here, right here. I'm going to put the opening mark tag. And again, this editor goes ahead and throws in the closing mark tag there. Let's go ahead and cut that out of there. Paste that right here and save. And again, that's this right here. Bring this up. And by default, the mark tag highlights in yellow. Now you can go ahead and style this as well. Let's go ahead and do that real quick. Come on up here into our head section where the style is. Let's go ahead and put our cursor there and get us another blank spot there for our mark styling. And just like the other styling, here's our selector that we're going to be styling. In this case, it's mark. And we got our opening curly bracket. Then I'm going to change the background color. That's our property. Then the colon, and then the value. In this case, khaki. Another demonstration of one of the wild names of the colors that most browsers will recognize. Let's go ahead and save this. And there you go. Now, of course, khaki's a little bit on the beige side of things, but that's it. And of course, you can do this however you want using RGB, hex code, or the color name. Thusly. Now, if you're interested in seeing more color names, you could just do a search for HTML color names, or you can check out this site here. That's html-color-names.com/color-chart.php. This lists 140 color names, and I think actually I've seen elsewhere where there's 143 or 147. So I think 140 is still plenty to get you going. And that is how you can add color to your HTML documents text. Thanks for watching, and you have a great day. Now there are many design elements you can add to your HTML documents using CSS, also known as cascading style sheets. This video will show you how to adjust the horizontal alignment of the text on your HTML document. You know, if you want it all the way to the left side of the page, or all the way to the right side of the page, or even centered, or if you want it lined up evenly on both the right and the left margins. This, by the way, is called justified. Different alignments might come in handy if, say, you wanted to line up the text in your footer to the center, or if you had a page number or a date at the top of your page and needed it to the far right or to the far left. Here, let's open up our editor and look at an example. Now, I've got some content here in the body section, and up here in the head section, I've already added some styling, one for the H1 tag that's going to align the text between the opening and closing H1 tags in the center of the page, and for the H2 tags I've got it set up to align to the right for all the content that's located between the opening and closing H2 tag. And for the paragraphs, I've got a couple of them here, but I've only got one of them that's using the class justified as defined up here, which will be, you guessed it, align justified. And these are set up using the basic CSS syntax, where I've got the opening curly bracket, the property, in this example it's text-align, and then the colon, and then the value, in this example center. Then I've got the semicolon and then the closing curly brackets. And pretty much the same with the others here. Now with classes and IDs, you can name them anything you want really. I just named this one justified because that kind of describes what I'm wanting to accomplish here in this particular syntax. And that is to have the text aligned justified. Let's go ahead and look at this in our browser. And I'm just going to demonstrate this within the editor's browser right here. Kind of keep things all in one spot. And here we are. This is the H1 tag that's aligned to the center, and the H2 tags, which I normally would not do, but for this example it'll work just fine. But the H2 tags are lined up to the right, and the second paragraph is aligned justified. Now it's not a great example, but as you can see here, the first paragraph that's not styled at all, the margins are even on the left, and that's pretty much the default. And then the space between the words and text is even throughout, which is going to leave some of the space over here to the right. Now, if this were aligned to the right, then it would be even, then the margins would be even over here on the right, and these gaps here would show up over here. But with it being justified, as you can see here, it's even on the left margin as well as the right margin. And how that happens is that the spaces between the characters and the words are stretched out so that this will be even on both ends. And this brings us to the end of the video on using CSS to style the alignment of your text on your HTML document. This video will demonstrate using CSS to change the text font type. Being able to display the text on your HTML documents the way you want them to look is an important part of keeping site visitors on the site and coming back. If the font you are using is not a popular web-safe font and it is a bit of a distraction, then you risk the site visitor bolting off the site quicker than they can say, "Ow, my eyes." First, let's look at the web-safe fonts by doing a search for web-safe fonts, or you can just head on over to this site here at MIT. Hey, I used to go there. Oh, no, wait, this is the one out on the East Coast. The one I went to is Missouri Institute of Technology. Probably a little bit different. And you can just see here what they mean by web-safe fonts and kind of summarizing it. Basically, web-safe fonts means that more than likely the visitor's computer will have these fonts installed. So if you plan on using some off-the-wall font just because it looks cool on your computer, that's probably because you've got that font installed on your computer. Not everyone will have that particular font installed on their computer. So to be safe, use a safe web font. Ideally, you should be looking at using sans serif fonts. A sans serif font is one that doesn't have serifs. That's because sans is French for without, and serif is the little squiggly or decorative flourish at the end of the strokes on the characters. Now, while these serif fonts will look pretty cool in print, they might not look so hot on web pages. Now that I've mentioned sans serif, I should also mention that there are two types of font families. Number one, the family name like Times or Arial or Impact, and two, the generic family names like serif or sans serif or monospace, fantasy, and cursive. When creating your font family inside your CSS syntax, you should list 3 different fonts. Start with the font you want, then a second and third font. These are called fallbacks, just in case the first choice is not installed on the viewer's computer. And always end with a generic family to let the browser pick a similar font in that generic family if no other fonts are available. And remember, the generic family are those like the serifs, the sans serifs, monospace, and so on. Oh yeah, and if you're using a font with 2 names, like Arial Black for example, then you need to group the name with double quotes. And all fonts are separated by commas. Okay, so let's go ahead and open up our editor and take a look at what I've been rambling on about. Now, I've got a basic HTML5 document here, and in the body section, I've got some content broken up with an H1 tag, H2 tag, and a couple of paragraphs here. And up here in the head section, I've got the styling for our font families. And this is what I was referring to here as far as having at least 3 different. The primary one, that's the font that I really want, but if that one's not available on that particular computer, then I've got Helvetica, and then the generic font family here, sans serif. So of these types of fonts, I would much rather have a sans serif than nothing at all, but I'd rather have Arial. And I've also added a class selector here that I added down here in the second paragraph for a different font family, showing you here how you should group together multiple names, or basically if your font name has white space in it, like for example this one does, then they should be grouped together using double quotes on either end. And all the fonts in this font family are separated by a comma. Now you see here I've only listed 3. You can have as many as you want. And if the first one's not available, then the browser will look at the second one. If it's not available, then it'll look at the third one and the fourth one and so on. But again, you should always finish up or have the last font in your family selection to be a generic font. So let's see how this looks in the browser. Well, and by the way, if it's not spelled out, like for example the H1 tag content and the H2 tag content, they're not defined up here in the style section. So these are just going to be the default fonts that are set in a particular browser. Depending upon how you have your browser set, then that's going to be the default font that's showed. Come on up here and we'll just see what this looks like inside of Komodo. And here we go. So these two here, the H1 and H2 tags that are not defined up here in the style section are just the plain default font that is set inside of this particular browser, that being Komodo. Where I have the styling app is in the paragraph right here, and this is Arial. And if Arial was not available, which more times than not it is because it's one of those web safe fonts, then it would go to Helvetica and then some type of a generic sans serif type font. Now I spelled out this one down here, the second paragraph, to have the comic font as the primary and then the Helvetica and then some sans serif. So let's come on down here and take a look. That's the primary, that's the comic font. Now in case you're wondering just how many types of fonts there are, way too many to mention in this video, or any video for that matter. But here's the list of some of the more popular font families. And if you wanted to have a better idea of various fonts outside of those web-safe fonts, then just do a search for fonts or free fonts. Remember though, those would probably work best on some type of a print format rather than a web format. You really should stick with the web-safe fonts for your web design. And that's going to bring us to the end of this video on using CSS to change the font family on your HTML documents. Thanks for watching, and you have a great day. There are many design elements you can add to your HTML documents using CSS, also known as cascading style sheets. This video will show you how to adjust the font style of the text on your HTML document. You know, if you want it to be shown in italics or just the normal style. Different font styles might come in handy if, say, you wanted to have a group of text or a paragraph stand out. Like for example, you've got a quote in there somewhere. Here, let's take a look at an example in our editor. Now, here in my editor, this is a Komodo editor, by the way. I've got my content down here in the body section, and I've already got some styles set up here in the head section between the opening and the closing style tags. And I've got the styles already added down here in the content area. Like for example, under H2, I'm using the h2.italic class, and it is going to be, you got it, styled italics. And I've got the first paragraph styled with italics and the second paragraph styled with oblique to demonstrate these two different types of style. And I've got them set up here in the normal CSS syntax, where we've got the name of the selector, then we've got the space, and then the opening curly brackets, then the property and value. In this case, the property is font-style, and then we've got the colon, then the value. In this top example, it's normal, then italic, then oblique, and then italic for the h2.italic class. So let's go ahead and take a look at this in our Komodo browser. And here we go. Now there's no styling in the h1 tag content right here, so that's just normal. Now in this first h2 tag, we've got that styled as italic, and then the second h2 tag, no additional styling whatsoever. That's why it looks just normal. So let's take a look at the difference between italic and oblique. That's the first paragraph is italic, as you can see here, and the second paragraph is oblique, as you can see here, as defined by this particular class. Now, you can look very, very close here and still not see a difference, because there really is no difference. Technically, there is a difference. Just like technically there is a difference between stereophonic sound and quadraphonic sound, only most of us normal people cannot hear the difference between a stereophonic sound and a quadraphonic sound, but yes, there is a technical difference between the two. Now, that's styling the different blocks. What if you wanted to style just a few words or a sentence, or even a single word within these blocks? Well, that's where an inline CSS style would come into play, and we would use the span tag. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Let's say that right here, this entire block is italicized, but we want to use the normal style on lorem ipsum right here, which in the first paragraph is right here. So in this case, we want to put in the opening span tag, then space, then the style attribute, equals, throw in a couple of double quotes, and in between those double quotes we're going to put the font-style : italic, just like we have it up here in the style section here. And I'm just going to cheat a little bit and just copy this right out of here and come on down here and paste it right in between those double quotes thusly. And let's go ahead and save this, and remember it's right here, the lorem ipsum that we're going to be normalizing. And there we go. Okay, so there's a reason behind using the normal style. That's how you can add font style to a small group of words or a single word within a block of text. And this brings us to the end of this video on using CSS to style the text on your HTML document. There are many design elements you can add to your HTML documents using CSS, also known as cascading style sheets. This video will show you how to add a shadow effect to the text in your HTML document. Now, adding a shadow effect will not only add emphasis to the targeted text, in this example it's going to be the h1 tag, but it will also give your document that wow factor that could keep your visitor on your site longer and even coming back to your site more regularly. Here, let's take a look at an example in our editor. Now, I've already added some content down here in the body section, h1 tag, h2 tag, and a couple of paragraphs, and I've already added the CSS syntax for our text shadow style up here in the head section between the opening and closing style tag. And there's really not a whole lot to it. We've got the selector here. In this case, we're going to be styling the h1 tag. You can do the same thing with the h2 or paragraph, or even add classes or ID selectors to this, but we're going to keep things kind of basic for now. And we've got the opening curly bracket, and then the property here is text-shadow. Then we separate the property from the value with the colon, and then we've got these four items here. The first one, the -2 pixel, second one, the 2 pixel, the third one, the 3 pixel, and then the fourth item is the hexadecimal color code for red. Now, the breakdown here is this first item, the -2, that's for the offset of the horizontal. The second one is the offset for the vertical. The third one is the blur. And then the fourth one is the color of the blur. Now, of course, me just talking is not going to help you get the visual, so let me go ahead and open this up in our browser to show you how this works. I'm just going to keep things here inside of the Komodo browser, and there we are. Now, we've got the red blur, that's this third item here, and the overall shadow is offset horizontally -2. Now, if we were to make this, let's say, -5, just for demonstration purposes, you can see how it shoots it over to the left that much more, in this case 3 pixels. And if we were to maybe just get rid of this minus, it should shoot it over to the right. And if we wanted to make the offset vertically even more or less, then we can adjust the second number thusly, and so on. And you can even adjust, of course, whether or not you wanted more blur or less blur. Now let's kick this up a notch, and using the text shadow property, we're going to create a cool 3D effect. And I'm just going to paste this right over this. Now what I wanted to demonstrate here is not just the cool 3D effect, but how you're using the text shadow property to get that 3D effect. Now I just arbitrarily picked the color of the H1 tag text, but of course you would want to pick the color here to better match the surroundings on your HTML document. The thing I wanted to mainly point out here though was that I'm using 7 different values for that text shadow property to give that standing off the page type 3D effect. In each of these I'm not using any blur whatsoever except for the last item here. Well, here, let me just show you. And I'm using the impact font, and I've really bumped up the size to 60 pixels. Let's go ahead and save this. And there you go. So you can see how it's kind of standing off the page there. And you can adjust these various colors here to, again, better match the surroundings. Play around with this. Now, one thing I should note here, though, is that to remain W3C compliant, you should have a background color of the body section defined whenever you are adjusting the color of any of the text in your document. So to keep things all kind of compliant here, let me go ahead and throw in a background color as well. I mean, it will still work just fine without the body background color being defined, but again, to keep things compliant with the W3C folks, you might want to go ahead and add this in here. And there you have it. This brings us to the end of this video on using CSS and the text shadow property on your HTML document. This video will show you how to create a box using CSS. This can be very useful if you want to separate a bit of content on your document from the surrounding content by putting it in a box. Now this should not be confused with simply adding a border around your text, because while adding a border allows for various styling, it does go the entire width of the browser window. With the CSS box model that we're going to be demonstrating here, you're allowed more control over both the width and the height. Now with the CSS box model, you have 4 parts that you can style. You have the margin, the border, and padding, all surrounding the content box. Here, let's open up our editor and have a look at an example of putting together a CSS box. Now, I've already added some content down here and some styling up here for our CSS box in between the opening and closing style tags here in the head section. Now, this is basic CSS syntax where I've created a class called CoolBox. Now you can name these classes as well as IDs anything you want, and I named this one CoolBox because, well, it's about a box and I think it's cool. Now we are associating this with a div tag, so I've added that in the CSS syntax here, and I've already added that div tag here in the content area. Now we've got the, like I said, the basic CSS syntax where we have the opening curly brackets, and I've got the width property and the value I have in ems across the board. I find that that's better and actually recommended instead of having pixels, because in em, 1 em equals whatever the default is for that browser, and if it's not defined anywhere, then it's by default going to be equal to 16 pixels. So if you've got, say for example, the width here, I wanted that to be like 450 pixels, you would simply divide 450 into 16 to come up with the em value, and that's what I did here. Likewise with the padding, the border, and the margin. Now if we take a look at this in our browser, come on up here, I'm just going to keep everything right here in this window, so I'm going to look at it here in the Komodo browser. That's, by the way, the name of this editor here. It's called Komodo. And right here's our box. Now, one thing you may have noticed here is that I did not define the height. You can, but whenever you do not define the height, then the height stretches to the size of the content within that box. Let me throw an image in here real quick just to demonstrate. Come on down here and let's put it at the end of our text of the content and save. And there it is. Nope, let me stretch that out a little bit. Let's say 250 on the width. There you go. And you can even style this a little bit more by putting it in the center of this box. But as you can see here, the box stretched to the size of the content within that box. And there's so much more styling you can do with this. Now, the way I have it set up here is that the padding, for example, is the same all the way around. For example, if we wanted less padding on the left, more padding on the top and bottom, we can do that by simply adding additional styles here. Padding dash left, certain amount. Padding dash right, certain amount, and so on. Likewise with the border and the margin. The way that it's set up right now, the margin is this number all the way around. The margin, by the way, is outside of the border. And likewise with the border. And we can style the border, as you see here, even further than just the width. You can style it with the color, and the value of this border style is, in this case, dotted. There's a whole bunch of different options you can go with here, from dashed to solid to even outset, ridge, and groove. For example, let's throw outset in here. Kind of gives it a little bit more of a pizzazz. And of course you can adjust the color as well, and so on. And this brings us to the end of this video on adding a CSS box to your HTML document. Having a neatly styled CSS box on your HTML document will add some extra flair, but I guess more importantly, the box will allow you to separate or highlight certain blocks of your content from other content on your document. This video will show you how quick you can add rounded corners to your CSS content box and really make it stand out. Let's go ahead and open up our editor and have a look at the code to add the rounded corners. Now I've already added my content down here in the body section, and this is just a basic HTML5 document. And up here in the head section, I've got my opening and closing style tags with the code I'm using to generate the box. And I basically created a class titled My CSS Box. And using the basic CSS syntax, I've got my opening curly bracket and the properties to define the box and their values. And this is just one way to list this. Using it like this, I've got, for example, using the padding with just the one value. That means that the same value is going to be listed on the top, bottom, left, and right. If you wanted them different on some of those sides, then you could spell it out. For example, padding dash left, and then put the value that you want. Padding dash bottom, put the value that you want, and so on. Likewise with the border and the margin. The way I have them listed here, the value represents all four sides. And with the border, you can also style it even further by having different types of the border. For example, I've got groove demonstrated here. You can have dashed, dotted, solid, double, outset, inset, as well as the color. And you can see here I'm using the colored name opposed to the hex code or the RGB values. And down here in the content area, I've got the My CSS Box class already spelled out down here using the opening div class tag, and down here I've got the closing div tag. And inside of this block content I've got a couple of different paragraphs. Okay, enough of me yammering on. Let's take a look at how this box looks before we add the rounded corners, because right now no rounded corners. Let's go ahead and open this up in our browser here inside of the Komodo Editor, and that's basically it. We've got the border, and this is called groove, and if we were to change this to, let's say, inset, and then save. Yeah, you can see there's a little bit of a difference there. You can go with dashed. I mean, like I said, there's a bunch of different ones. And there, that kind of stands out. Now, this may not look as good with the rounded corners as, say, a more solid border, but we'll have a look at it anyway. Now, I'm using EMs instead of, say, pixels or percentages because an EM better represents the values of that particular browser this is being seen in. And if there are no set values or changed values for that browser, then 1 EM equals 16 pixels. So if, say, I normally would have a 10 pixel wide border, then I would take 10, divide it into 16 to come up with 0.3125. Okay, so that's the math part of it. Let's go ahead and add a rounded corner to this. And this is all we need for this to be a rounded corner. However, not all browsers recognize border-radius. Let's go ahead and save this. And in this particular browser, it works just fine. Let's have a look at this in, say, the Chrome browser. It's working just fine there as well. And let's see about Firefox. Working there as well. And how about Internet Explorer? So far, we were batting 1,000. Let's try Safari on all of them. Fantastic. So the only one that I have not really tested this on major browser-wise is Opera. And that's mainly because I don't have Opera installed on my computer. But for the most part, this is all we need. How simple is that? Now you can adjust the radius here, the curvature, by this number right here. If you want it more, increase the number. And let's see what it looks like in Chrome. And that will hold true in all the browsers that I just demonstrated. So now you know how you can add some additional style to your already stylish CSS box. That's going to bring us to the end of this video on adding rounded corners to your CSS box. Adding a content or CSS box to your HTML document can really make the content inside that box stand out from the rest of the content in your document. Now, when you add some cool styling that is now available using CSS3, your content box is going to stand out even more. This video will show you just how easy it is to add a shadow to your CSS or content box. Let's go ahead and open up our editor and see an example of the code required to add our shadow. Now I've already added some basic content here in between the body tags, and I've added some basic CSS syntax up here in between the opening and closing style tags within our head section that will define our box for us. And I've gone ahead and in the content area down here added our div tag that specifies the class shadow box right here in this content. So everything in between this opening div tag and this closing div tag will be inside of the box that we're about to style with that shadow. Now the way I have things laid out right here right now is that the padding, border, and margin are going to be the same on all four sides. You can in fact specify the padding to be different from the top to the bottom to the left or the right, but you'd have to spell that out even more. For example, if we wanted the padding on the top to be different than the padding on the bottom, then we would say padding dash bottom and then put the value here. Then we'd also have the property padding dash top and then the value for that. But I want to keep things simple and basically have all four sides of the padding, the border, and the margin to be the same as spelled out here. And as you can see, I have mine set in ems instead of pixels or percentages. I think it just works better in today's different browsers, be it a desktop or a tablet or a mobile device. And with a border, by the way, I also want to point out that there's a lot more styling you can do with the border. Like for example, here I've got the border solid and red. You've got different values you can work with here, whether it's dashed, dotted, outset, inset, groove, double, but I'm going to go with solid, again, to keep things simple. And likewise with the color, you can have the color name, as I have here, or you can have a hexadecimal code, or you can have the RGB code. Again, trying to err on the side of simplicity, I'm going with just the color name. So instead of me rambling on any further, let's take a look at this in the Komodo browser first off. And here is our basic box without the shadow. Let's go ahead and throw in our shadow code right here at the bottom, and that's it. We just need to have the property of box dash shadow, the colon, and then the value of the horizontal, value of the vertical, and the value of the blur. And this is the color of the blur. This is kind of a grayish color that you're going to see here in just a second. Let me go ahead and save this. And there we go. Pretty nifty. Really makes it stand out. Now you can adjust the shadow by adjusting these values here, including the color of the blur. Oh, and if you wanted the shadow to be on a different side, maybe more top and left rather than right and bottom, then you can just add the negative signs here to make that quick adjustment and save. There we are. Now let's check this out on the browsers. Chrome, Firefox, Internet Explorer, and Safari. Now, I don't have Opera installed on my computer, so I'm not sure how that would work, but I believe it works in Opera as well. And that's going to bring us to the end of this video on adding a shadow to your content or CSS box to really make it stand out on your document. Thanks for watching, and you have a great day.